Hello, everyone. Good morning from Indonesia. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the globe you are joining us from. Thank you so much for joining our session, Drone Journalism 101 with Ben Kreimer. Thank you, Ben, for being with us today. We understand that now it's late in the US, so we really appreciate it. So everyone, welcome to the session. I'm Rio. It's my pleasure to be your moderator. In this session, Drone Journalism 101, we will learn about the use of technology, new technology, drone in newsroom settings. How can we utilize it to produce journalism stories? What kind of stories could we potentially craft with the technology? What about the cost? And is it a common practice in newsroom across the United States? We'll hear this and many more from Ben. And this session is part of the Daytime Computational Journalism Conference, the first in Indonesia, Indonesia's first and leading data journalism conference, highlighting best practices of data journalism, exploring new emerging technologies, showcasing stories, exchanging knowledge between experts from the US, like Ben, Indonesia, Australia, Sweden, England, Nepal, and many more. This conference is fully funded by the United States Embassy in Jakarta. So without further ado, Ben Kreimer is a journalism technologist developing enduring applications for drone, immersive, and other emerging and emerged media technologies. He focuses on democratizing access to hardware and software tools, including the use of open source platforms and low-cost hacks and materials. His works have earned so many accolades. For his works in media, Ben was a Forbes 30 Under 30 honoree. He also the Beta Fellow at BuzzFeed's Open Lab for Journalism, Technology, and the Arts. He has worked on projects with various leading organizations worldwide, from civil society organizations, government agencies, and universities. That includes Tau Center for Digital Journalism at Columbia University, New York. The Ford Foundation is Africa, USC, Annenberg, and many, many more. His incredible works have been covered by National Public Radio, NPR, Al Jazeera, The Washington Post, and other global media outlets. So without further ado, Ben, the floor is yours.
Okay, I will share screen, and can you see my title slide? Great.
You can
okay.
see it.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Rio, for the introduction and for the entire conference team. I know that this conference, it's interesting that it's happening now. I mean, I know it's been in the works for a long time. So it's great that everything's unfolding, and here we are, and here I am to talk to you about drones, something that I've been working on now for about 10 years, or working with for about 10 years. So my title changes all the time, I guess. I'm an independent journalism technologist, an independent creative technologist. To be honest, in some situations, it depends on who I'm talking to. But in essence, the work I do focuses on using new technologies that are, I like to think at least, accessible relatively simple, and relatively inexpensive. So a lot of times with new technologies, they're hard to use, they are very expensive, and I like to find ways to do things inexpensively, cheaply, and in that sense, accessibly, so that, you know, myself, journalists, other digital creatives, so that you can use these tools now. I focus on emerging tech to figure out, and also to do active, ongoing stories from new and different perspectives. I like to try to find stories that perhaps could not have been told before, and that we can, use a drone, say, to tell a story that just wasn't possible to tell it either in a new way or or from a certain perspective. How can we use technologies to tell stories that we just couldn't tell before? I do a lot of work with immersive mediums, so virtual reality, augmented reality, and I'm really interested in sort of audience engagement with these new forms of media, with these 3D virtual reality, augmented reality mediums. And so drones are really a part of this bigger sort of technology ecosystem, and that's really important. So sure, this is a sort of drone journalism 101, but you cannot not talk about these other technologies too, because they all kind of swirl together and they work together very seamlessly. And that's what my work really focuses on, is sort of colliding these different emerging techs. And so I will focus on drones, and a lot of the work that I've done has been in the journalism context, but it's also been in the university sort of research side of things. In some cases, sort of literally journalism research, working with journalism scholars. How do we use drones for journalism? Or in other situations, it's more of an applied form of research. So like I work with archaeologists every summer. In fact, in a week, I will be traveling to Turkey for the sixth, I think the 6th or 7th time, to do archaeology fieldwork with drones. And what I will share in a little bit will sort of reveal how I've taken technical drone applications from archaeology and brought them to journalism. In fact, I've learned a lot from archaeologists in terms of visual documentation methods and ways of using new technologies like drones. If you want to look to another industry or another field for inspiration, look at archaeology, because when you think about it, they deal a lot with new technologies and visual documentation of archaeological excavations. But anyway, I digress. Yeah, I've worked with a lot of different organizations. I was a Forbes 30 Under 30 in 2019 for all this kind of emerging media work. And of course, the story comes first. That's a given. A lot of people say that. Everybody, I think, says that who works with new technology, but it's true. And these technologies, drones especially, are just a tool. I believe very strongly in interdisciplinary work and exploration. So like I was talking about archaeology and working with archaeologists. Frugal innovation, again, not being stopped by the price tag. How can we do this work with new technologies inexpensively? And I think especially in the Global South context, this is really important. And I'll talk about this more in the presentation, but I really believe in not getting stuck because of how much something costs. There's always usually a less expensive way to go about it. And a lot of times it's less thinking and more making, more doing. So try to just work with the technologies, work with the software, work with the hardware, and learn it. Figure out, take it to an open area, a park. Take your drone to a park, learn how to fly it, learn how to do novel sort of workflows with your drone. Just use it. It's kind of my point. And I use a lot of different technologies, and a lot of what I've done in figuring them out has been on my own. And it's through that process of learning by doing, both in a purely sort of professional context, but also, again, just taking it out into a grassy area and trying something with a drone, trying something new. So yeah, this is one kit. This is actually one kit that I traveled with, or that I was traveling with for a while. So there's a 360 video camera, 2 drones, a Micro Four Thirds camera, an ambisonic spatial microphone. So I can produce all kinds of different media and for different mediums with these tools. And the drones are oftentimes a central part of this toolkit. So what I'm really getting at here is I'm sharing I'm going to share my process and my path that kind of got me to this point now. And what I want you to do also is not just think about, drones and what can I do with a drone, but also what is your process and what is your path into technologies? And drones are just one of the technologies that, frankly, I think you should at least be aware of, if not already using. Drones are quite common around the world. They've really become accessible. But the point really here is I'm showing my process and path through the use of drones. And perhaps you can start to envision your own, like, how would you adopt a drone for your given work? I started by literally building drones. This was 10 years ago when I was a university student. And at the time, you could not just buy a drone off the shelf and go out and fly it. You had to build it. They were very difficult to fly. I lost one in a river. Times have changed a lot over the past 10 years to where the ubiquitous DJI Phantoms have sort of taken over the drone world. They're kind of like the iPhone of drones, the white drone. Usually when there's a bad, like when somebody crashes a drone or hurts somebody, there's a photo, like a stock photo of the DJI Phantom that's representational of the story of the drone story, unfortunately for DJI. But my point is that drone technologies have advanced, and now you can just buy a drone off the shelf, take it outside and go fly. It's really amazing, having started at the very beginning of drone technologies. So when to use a drone? There's really only a couple very broad examples or statements that I will share like this, but it's to get an aerial perspective of anything. My background is this photo. It's a drone photo. It's from India. These are ships, small ships that are stuck at low tide. It's a beautiful shot. The drone made it so easy to get this photo at sunset. And I took this photo about 9 years ago when I was traveling in India with a drone and just learning how to use it in the field and taking photos and videos or photos like this. But again, it seems kind of obvious, but a drone is a replacement for an airplane, for a helicopter. It kind of democratizes access to the air for journalists, which is significant because if you go back just 10 years ago, in the US, you had traffic helicopters, you had news reporters going out in helicopters to document, traffic jams in Los Angeles. It's really expensive to fly a helicopter. I don't know exactly how much it is, but I'm extremely confident in saying that you could buy a drone kit for the price of one helicopter flight. Okay, so drones democratize access to the air. Drones democratize access for journalists to bring cameras up into the air to get shots of all kinds. But also, it's important to remember that a drone is not just a helicopter replacement or an airplane replacement. And by that, I'm talking about how high are you flying your drone, right? So like in this shot, I was probably about 100, 120 meters above the ground. And this shot, I was probably more like 15 or 20 at most. And my point is that drones can provide you with an aerial camera platform that works literally from like a centimeter off the ground up to whatever the legal limit is for flying that drone. So it's important to remember that drones also open up airspace just above your head. Like literally you could just send a camera up, just over your head to get a very different but difficult to get shot that you would have trouble doing with a tripod, say, right? So you don't have to fly very high with a drone to get a very novel, unique perspective. And it's important to remember that, I think. And so some of the early photos that I took in India, again, I did a lot of work in India early on, even doing football match photography for the Times of India. Again, it was just, it was, as you can see that in the center here, there's this tiny headshot of me and then my drone. I wasn't flying very high. So, a drone is it's just a great tool. It's a camera that you can move anywhere in space. It defies gravity. It's really amazing for shots at all heights, all altitudes. So again, a drone anymore, when you buy a drone, you're really buying a camera that happens to be on a flying machine. And by that, I mean, if you want a recommendation as to what drone to buy, I would say go buy a DJI drone, any of them. They're super reliable. Really what you're looking at is the camera. Look at the camera specs. Do you want a 4K drone? Do you want a 5K drone? I mean, the camera is really what you're buying anymore. And so it's because of that, and it's because that really a drone allows you to defy gravity and to move a camera through space in really novel ways that, again, you know, when you're thinking about drones for journalism, it's about putting cameras into a place in the air that has been inaccessible or that is otherwise not accessible, being able to capture shots. These are shots that I did from working with CCTV Africa and working with wildlife conservancies in East Africa with a drone. So again, just really novel shots that were made easy by a drone. And this is just video. I mean, it's, or like this shot of the lion. So I'm not very high off the ground, but it's a very unusual shot. And this is one of my favorites. So flying around the giraffe at eye level. Usually a photo or a video is not at eye level of the giraffe. And so again, a drone, you know, it makes it possible to get those unusual perspectives that are unusual from a human height level perspective. Jumping into BuzzFeed work and also 360 video. So it's true, you anymore, when you buy a drone, you're buying a camera that's on the drone. Now, you're not building a drone anymore. So 10 years ago, I was soldering the motors and the flight controller and all the components together. Today, in most cases, you're not going to actually be building or modifying a drone, except for when you want to do a kind of niche activity. So like, for example, 360 video capture with a drone. You cannot go out and buy a 360 video camera drone that I'm aware of. Or if you can, they're not common. It'd be very rare. They would be a very special product. So like DJI, the world's largest manufacturer of drones, they do not have a 360 video drone. So you might today, as I was doing, I guess this was 7 years ago now almost, modifying drones to carry special payloads, special cameras. So at the time, as I would still do today, that payload could be a 360 video camera. And so really the idea here is, with a lot of the work that I do, and drones fall into this category, sometimes the technology and the companies producing the technology, it's like there's innovation happening that the companies haven't yet mass produced, right? So you need to modify what you can buy off the shelf. So I would 3D print and still do 3D print camera mounts for my drones to hold different kinds of cameras, 360 video cameras. And I'll do very, very small modifications to the drones themselves. So this was an early 360 video drone. And it brings me to another and my third final sort of, this is when you can use the drone, and that is to access a space safely. And to demonstrate or to illustrate this, what I mean by this, I'll take you to the first 360 video that we did at BuzzFeed. And it was a grainy 360 video that was shot largely with the drone that I put together. And what's notable, this is a story about a forest fire in California. And we used the drone to put a camera in places that were too dangerous for a human to go. And so, well, now she's holding the camera, but if I go back here, so like this here, this is it's a burned out house. And there's toxic materials, there's lots of nails. You would not want to go walk into the middle of this house, as an example. So you could fly a drone over it though, very safely. So again, drones for disaster areas are a great way to gain access to a location with a camera that it would be too dangerous for you as a human to go. And that's what we were doing with this 360 video story. We were putting a camera in a place that was too dangerous to put a tripod to walk out onto. Here's another shot. And I will say, it's a very technical note, but this video shot right here, it's kind of dark, it's kind of grainy. So this was with a camera that we bought made by Ricoh, the Ricoh Theta. If we jump ahead here in this shot, it's much more clear, it's brighter. So this was the custom camera that I had put together using 2 GoPros. So again, even the camera technology, sometimes you can actually sort of hack together your own hardware kit and make something better than what you could buy. Anyway, you can see people in hazardous materials suits over here. We've got the 360 drone flying over another burned out structure. So yeah, this was the Valley Fire 360 video. And again, think of a drone as a way to at times access dangerous places. Again, if you want to make a drone, sometimes you just need foam and cable ties, and then you can attach cameras to a drone. So this was another prototype, and I share this just to say and to show that, you know, you can do real sort of professional work using hacked together materials and combinations of hardware. And then you can, of course, make something more polished. So for a while, I was using this setup here for 360 cameras on a drone, and I would 3D print after my foam prototype. After the foam prototype, I would then 3D print the camera holders, the carriers. But this here is an example. So this is on the coast of California. So this video shows an iteration, the new version of my 360 video drone. And I can go back. Okay. So notice how the cameras are on the top and bottom of the drone. In doing this little hack, the drone disappears. So now we don't see the drone anymore, and we just have this flying 360 camera where you can look up and down and all around. So that was one project at BuzzFeed. And here, just to show frugal innovation, I used a cardboard box to take as a takeoff point for the drone. So again, nothing fancy. I needed a takeoff sort of launch pad because I had a camera underneath the drone. So sometimes all you need is a cardboard box to be innovative. These are a couple projects that involve this 360 drone kit with the Desert Sun in Arizona in the US, USC Annenberg and the USA Today Network. I've also done a lot of work with sort of in the international development NGO space. So one project was, and I'll show this. I'll jump out of the PowerPoint. So again, like I was saying earlier, the drone. Here we go. So the drone is just a part of a larger toolkit. And so like in this video here, this was in Tanzania, in Zanzibar. And I was helping this team of women who they harvest seaweed and sell products made from the seaweed. So we were doing a project to basically show their work and how they work. And I will play this. Here we go. So I'll jump through. Whoops, not too far. Okay, so the drone, you know, we would do camera shots on the ground, and then of course we would take to the skies. Yeah, and use that drone that I was showing with the camera on the top and bottom to capture the context of the area, the space, the environment where we were doing the story, and the context, spatial context of the story itself. Okay, that's all I'll show of that. All right. So now we'll jump to Turkey. So working with archaeologists, like I've said, has been really useful for me as a way to learn how to use these technologies. And it's been very helpful to learn photogrammetry, which is the process of creating three-dimensional reconstructions of really anything, any physical object, big or small. So using, again, one of the Phantom drones, or you could do this with any drone, you can create three-dimensional models, three-dimensional, what do we call it? We call it, one way to call it or to term it is digital twinning. You're creating a digital twin of something like, this is a Roman temple. It's an archaeological excavation. You could even do it with, I don't know, like a phone or something. I guess you can't see my phone. Anyway, photogrammetry and drones work well together. And I'm now going to talk about photogrammetry because I think it's an underutilized process that many people use drones for, but not in journalism so much. So archaeologists have been using drones and photogrammetry for years and years. And before that, they were using kites and balloons, any way to get a camera in the air. So drones have really been a great help for archaeologists as well as journalists. And archaeologists use photogrammetry. And so basically, you can also create virtual reality environments from these photogrammetric models. So one way to create VR is through a drone and doing photogrammetry. These are sites. So I'm in this screen recording, I'm wearing VR goggles and I'm walking around these photogrammetry 3D reconstructions of this archaeological excavation in Turkey. Or of course, you can also do augmented reality projections, holograms, if you will, whatever you want to call them, from these 3D models too. So if you want to create VR and AR, then photogrammetry and drones are a great way to do so. If you want to create large scale, like if you want to take a structure, a landscape, a large area into VR, into AR, you'll very likely need to use a drone and photogrammetry. So it's basically a process for creating, photogrammetry is a process for creating 3D models from photographs, just photos. These are some very basic representations. The process involves taking lots and lots of photos in a very mechanical process. There's no art to it. It's all science. Because basically you are taking photographs to then give to computer software. And the computer software will look at the photos and it will analyze them and it will understand three-dimensional shapes just from two-dimensional photographs. I think it's pretty magical the way that this works, but it works and it is magic. And so if you're using a drone, instead of, if you're a videographer and you want to go out and take nice photos and videos, this is a very sort of almost boring process because most of your time is spent programming your drone to fly in a very particular way to capture photos that will be used for photogrammetry processing. So this here, for those of you, I'm going to assume that at least some people in the audience have a drone or have flown a drone. This is a drone, it's called the Ground Station Pro app. So this is a sort of secondary DJI app for flying your drone, for doing photogrammetry. And what you see here, these green lines that are parallel, this is the flight path that I'm programming my drone to fly. So you can see there's the waypoints up here in the top right. I've got my front overlap ratio, side overlap, course angle, all these numbers. Basically what I'm doing is telling the drone to do this. Take pictures in sequence like this, where there's a little bit of overlap, or there's a lot of overlap and a little bit of movement from image to image, right? So these are photogrammetry images that were captured using this method of programming a drone to fly automatically. That's the great thing. Once you program your drone, you basically press fly and it goes off and does the work for you. You can just sit back and watch that you're getting the images you need. So this photogrammetry drone process is very automated. And so one thing that you can do with this, and I think it's also worth mentioning Google Earth more broadly speaking, is you're probably familiar with Google Earth and the satellite imagery that Google Earth provides. And journalists make great use of Google Earth globally because of this satellite imagery. In one way that the journalists use it is to create video fly-throughs, say, of showing the satellite imagery. So what you can do with a drone, and of course the limitation of satellite imagery is that satellite imagery is dependent on the satellites taking the images and then Google Earth, importing the images into the platform. Who knows how long that takes? You can look at past historical satellite data in Google Earth, yes, but you have no control over when the images are taken, when they're brought into the platform. But with a drone and Google Earth, you do. So with a drone, because the drone has onboard GPS, when you take the images and you create a map, basically a photogrammetry image-based map, you can overlay your high-resolution drone imagery over the satellite imagery inside of Google Earth. Meaning, for example, let's say there was an earthquake, or better yet, let's say there was a cyclone, and the cyclone hits the coast, and for 7 days after the cyclone, there are clouds. Satellites cannot see through clouds, right? Unless, at least in terms of visual imagery, like we see in Google Earth. But you have a drone and you're on the coast and you can fly your drone and you can do photogrammetric mapping of the coastline that was damaged. And you can bring your imagery into Google Earth before the satellite data arrives, because the satellites can't even see through the clouds. And so basically here you can see the difference in resolution. On the right, we have my drone-based imagery, and here's a sidewalk. Over here, you can see the satellite-based imagery. It's much lower resolution as well. So with a drone and photogrammetry and Google Earth together, you can basically use Google Earth like you always have, but with higher resolution imagery and with imagery that is, I guess, current, or it shows exactly what you want to see, when it's happening or right after it's happened. So this is one way that you can use photogrammetry and drones in Google Earth. Yeah, much better resolution. So again, photogrammetry is taking images like this, where you move the camera slowly with lots of overlap, and then you can create these 3D models, and then you can share them in Facebook and social media using Sketchfab and other social media platforms. So Sketchfab, which I showed a little bit ago, Sketchfab is like YouTube for 3D content. It works. It's very much a good analogy to think of it like that. You can embed 3D models that are hosted in Sketchfab and websites, social media platforms. They have an app, like YouTube has an app. It's one way to distribute, to publish even, or at least just to share 3D content, including photogrammetry models that have been produced from a drone or built using a drone. So emerging technologies work well together. And like I showed, you can literally use a drone to create VR. I do have a guide to photogrammetry photography. I'll show this in the browser in a little bit, but this was with the Online News Association and Journalism 360. So if you want a very detailed guide to how to do photogrammetry photography, I would look here. I'll show this again in the PDF in a little bit. But another project. So the first African continent drone journalism project was started by a journalist named Dickens Olewe, a friend of mine, about 10 years ago. And we did a number of projects, including ones that I showed videos of earlier in this presentation. One of the projects that we did was about the Dandora dump, the Dandora landfill in Nairobi, which is one of the African continent's largest landfills. And we went in to do a video story with a drone. So I mean, this is what a drone can do, with the video camera or with the video camera on it. You can do really dynamic spatial shots like this. So we went in to shoot aerial video for a short video documentary about the landfill. And here's the scale of it. It's very, very large, very large. And we went to do a story about people like this man who pick through the trash and they sell what they find. And it creates, the story is that the landfill is a huge problem for the city, and yet it also supports a large community of people, for better or for worse, who make a living from selling what they find in the landfill. So the government is in this kind of dilemma where they need to move the landfill. It is overflowing. But when they do so, it's in a way going to be very economically bad for the community of people, for the economy and the community and the economy of people around the landfill. And so there's also the question of where do you put the new landfill? So it's a contentious story. It's a contentious reality without an easy solution. So yeah, here's a low drone shot. Again, sometimes you got to take the drone low and then go high. But so we did this drone video work, but then I also had a camera attachment that I made. So I like to do these low cost hacks, right? So this was the drone that I had, I had a GoPro camera mounted to it, but I also would take the GoPro off and I would put on this Canon camera for photogrammetry. And I attached the camera using a bottle cap and a nut and a bolt. And so it's very cheap, very low cost. And with that, I made a 3D model of the landfill using photogrammetry. So in this way, and the model is on Sketchfab. But this would then allow, the idea was, this would allow people to explore the landfill in the browser, so they could sort of fly around the landfill for themselves as though they were the drone. So not just watching a video, but now you can be the drone, you can fly and explore the landfill yourself. So this was back in 2014, and it was an early example of doing journalism work with photogrammetry and with a drone. And the techniques that I learned about 2 months before doing this landfill project, I learned with the archaeologists. So again, there was a direct knowledge, a direct interdisciplinary knowledge transfer from archaeology to working on this project with African Skycam. Continuing to focus on other people's work now, but focusing on the global south. So I think one of the best resources for learning about what drones can do also underwater drones, aerial, underwater, land-based drones, but mostly aerial drones. There's the Flying Labs, flyinglabs.org. So if the Flying Labs network, you can read it here, their little text. This is a screenshot of their website. But basically, they have these labs mostly around the global south, and their focus is on bringing emerging robotics technologies, especially drones, to communities to help with, they do a lot of data generation work, generating data sets, a lot of land mapping. A number of their labs deal with land rights issues, or the data that they generate from drones is used around land rights. And it's used to create maps of unmapped areas, which is a very common reality, especially on the African continent. And I'll show an example of this in a moment, a project, a journalism and a Flying Labs project. But anyway, Flying Labs are a great resource for learning about what you can do with drones. And they are not journalists, but the work they do would very closely align with data journalism, but also visual, other visual forms of journalism. And I'll show an example in a moment. But they also do like to test out new technologies. So like a recent post from the Tanzania Flying Labs, they're talking about this underwater drone. Of course, Tanzania is an island, so you can apply a lot of the same, even like the mapping, the photogrammetry techniques, you can apply to an underwater drone. And you can do photogrammetry underwater. So they were real excited about this Gladius mini underwater drone. I don't know anything about it other than they were excited about it. And here's another drone. I know I'm mostly talking about aerial drones, but underwater drones are a thing, and you should know that. Anyway, so Tanzania Flying Labs is one of the original, or at least one of the earliest Flying Labs operations. And they have a project, or they had a project that they finished called the Zanzibar Mapping Initiative. And you can find it at zanzibarmapping.org. And it is notable, well, I mean, first I'll say on the left here, this is Khadija Ali. She's one of their drone operators, and she's holding a fixed wing drone. So what I've been showing examples of, and what I've been showing pictures of, are multi-rotor drones. Most of the time, journalists are using DJI multi-rotor drones, quadcopters. So like the DJI Phantom, the Mavic Pro, most drones have 4 rotors, and they're a multi-rotor aircraft. There's also fixed wing airplane style drones, which are really only useful for mapping, for doing large scale landscape mapping photogrammetry work. Because if you think about it, an airplane style drone has to fly continuously like any airplane. So you don't have the kind of gravity defying capabilities that you do with a multi-rotor drone. So anyway, Zanzibar Mapping, they created maps of the entire island of Zanzibar, and I don't know how many years that it took them, but you can find all of their data on Open Aerial Map. So if you go to Open Aerial Map, it's an open source repository. It's like Google Maps, but for open aerial map data. And a lot of the content has a Creative Commons license, so you can use it with some level of open source. There's some level of open source usability. But people from around the world upload content or upload maps, photogrammetry maps, to Open Aerial Map. So the entire island of Zanzibar is on there, is on Open Aerial Map. And so you can see, like, here's just a screenshot of the website. So this is just one image, one photogrammetry image of Stone Town, Zanzibar. And you can see the resolution, the mapping resolution is 7 centimeters. You can see the date when the image was captured. And so again, this is a very common use for drones internationally, is for mapping and for using photogrammetry to create these very high resolution maps. So I was interested Indonesia doesn't have so much data. In fact, there's very little data, at least on Open Aerial Map, that people have uploaded from drones or captured by drones. Just FYI, just so you all know. Anyway, so there was a project that this is the convergence of sort of humanitarian drone mapping and journalism. There was a project specifically called Mapping Makoko, which is it's a floating community in Nigeria, in Lagos, and it was unmapped. There was no map of Makoko, and a team of journalists and drone operators made a map. They went on boats and they flew drones and they did aerial mapping, and on OpenStreetMap as well as Open Aerial Map, they basically created a map of this community. And it was supported by the there was Code for Africa. So another good example of how sort of the humanitarian and humanitarian data space interacts with journalism has been in the context of Code for Africa and the work that Code for Africa does across the African continent. It's worth looking at their website, and they do all kinds of civic data projects, some having to do with health, some with mapping. They do many different things. But my point is that it's about the integration of data and journalism and helping communities have access to data and data sets that they don't otherwise have access to, that governments don't otherwise provide them with. And so drones are one way that you can generate these kinds of data sets, and mapping is a very common application for creating civic data, or was one form of civic data that's quite common. So Frederick Mbuya, he's part of what's it called? African Drone, which is the current Code for Africa drone journalism project. He worked with Khadija Ali from Tanzania. Actually, Frederick is also from Tanzania. They both worked on this Mapping Makoko project. So yeah, their expertise applies in the journalism context, in the humanitarian context. I will also add that a lot of their work in Tanzania and in Zanzibar has to do with people, landowners in Zanzibar in many cases do not have legal title to their land, or they do not have a sort of spatial record of their land. And so land rights are just kind of an international problem and they take different forms, but their work has been very helpful in helping people get a sort of legal clarity around their land and literally like the dimensions of their land and their land boundaries. And so drones and mapping are commonly used in the global south around land rights issues because of how easy it is to make maps. I will show a website. Okay. I want to show this. So definitely I'm plugging Flying Labs. Their use cases page, you can see all the different projects that they've been doing with drones, monitoring illegal dumping of sewage sludge, mapping inaccessible terrain. So this is just in the African context. 3D irrigation for agriculture, marine biodiversity, of course, archaeology, livestock management. They do some drone delivery work too, COVID response mapping, a lot of mapping work. Drone mapping of saline lands, flood mapping. So my point is, if you just go to the flyinglabs.org/use cases webpage, just look at the projects that people are doing. There's a lot of work in Nepal too. So studying the Himalayan glaciers, mapping. When there was the big earthquake in Nepal in 2015, Nepal Flying Labs was very active doing disaster imaging and mapping with drones. So again, they were not journalists, they were not doing journalism, but the images they were capturing were very useful for journalists to help show the aftermath of the disaster, of the earthquake. Yeah, so the use cases page is great from Flying Labs. If you want to learn more about photogrammetry, to do it yourself, if you just do a Google search for journalism photogrammetry guide, the top result should probably be this guide to photogrammetry photography, which is what I made a couple of years ago. And in here, you will find lots of information and examples, journalism examples, not all from drones, but you'll find many photogrammetry examples. And you'll see, I explain how the process works, how you do photogrammetry. Some of it is with a handheld camera. And then also I have let's see, drone. So yeah, I talk about doing drone photogrammetry in here too. I should talk about this. So this just ended, but I just did a free course for the Knight Center in the US. So it's Knight Foundation supported, the Knight Center, they have their journalism courses. And there was a very international audience that took this course. It did just end, a few days ago. If you go to their website right now, you can still find the course. It's still available. And I think it'll be available it's not live. So like each week they would release a new module. The modules are all released. You can go to the website, kcccourses.org, and you can find the course, and it will be online for a long time. So if you want to also learn about photogrammetry through a MOOC, through an online course, there's also this through the Knight Center. And let's see. Oops. My tabs are hidden. There we go. Okay. One other thing I wanted to show you. So if you're interested in photogrammetry with drones specifically, I showed you Open Aerial Map, but you should also know about Open Drone Map. Now, it's software for processing, free software, open source, for processing drone photogrammetry mapping images. So if you have a drone and you want to do photogrammetry, you can process your images using this free software, this free toolkit. It can do a lot. I would check it out. Open Drone Map, WebODM. So yeah, there's the course, KCC courses. I'll quickly show you this. Oops, one more thing. So this is, I've talked a lot about it, but this is a project that I'm working on right now. So this is a photogrammetry reconstruction of a historic school in California. And what you can see here, so this is the 3D reconstruction. I used a drone and I also used a handheld camera. So as I zoom in here, you can see I took 1,500 photographs, and some of the photos were from a handheld camera, some were from a drone, but basically this is the let's see here, I can show you. This is the 3D model. This bar. So this is for an augmented reality story, and it involves this building, this school here. So this software that I'm using Reality Capture. There's a lot of different photogrammetry software that's available. this is the software that I like to use. I talk about it a little bit in my in the Night Center course. But yeah, you can create 3D models like this, and it takes a lot of photographs, but this is one way that you can use a drone. So I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Ben. It was so enlightening, and so many incredible works that you've shown us could be produced by drone technologies. A lot of aerial views that was previously only available through helicopter flight, and now it can be accessible by many newsroom to produce stories. So we got a couple of questions here. I believe you've touched so many stories, examples of using drones, but there's one questions that ask, can you show some pieces that use drones? So perhaps could you perhaps re-explain some of the most notable works that you've done? Perhaps you can explain how did you use drones in that particular stories? Perhaps you want to start with the seaweed or the or the landfill, or it can be any story.
I mean, yeah, I feel like I'm repeating myself to some degree. Although I do focus more on the technical side rather than like the story as a whole. But that's because I'm a technologist. Like, I focus on the technology application. That said, the types of drone stories, or the types of stories that would use a drone, a lot of them are environmental.
Mm-hmm.
So I can think of, off the top of my head, there was a story that the New York Times did about, I think it was melting glaciers in Greenland, right? So it's outdoors, it's very environmental. Coastline erosion. What are other examples? Agriculture in the US. I've seen agriculture stories that use a drone to fly over fields. What else? I mean, really, it's like anything that happens outside could use a drone. So like earthquake damage, tornado damage in the US, cyclones, tsunamis, hurricanes, sports, rally racing, Dakar rally. There's so many. It's yeah. And then of course, if you want to look beyond journalism, it's like look at the surveying industry. These tools that I'm using, that I've been talking about, like photogrammetry, that was basically designed for surveyors, for people who make maps, who do land surveys, for mining companies, for oil companies. I mean, it's a technology that journalists can then use, and digital creatives are now using to make video games. I mean, photogrammetry is used to make high resolution 3D video games now, but it's technology that was basically designed for, surveyors.
Yeah.
For in that industry. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's as you mentioned, it's pretty much still underutilized in the journalism sector, and we can use that more. So we move to the other questions, given the affordability of the drone. So has it been commonly practiced across newsroom in the United States? Is it sporadic, or there's a newsroom that is dedicatedly use this technology to produce stories?
So I'm not much of an analyst of drones anymore. I was 10 years ago, in terms of, because 10 years ago, it was like, there's one newsroom using a drone. Like, that's amazing. That's news. That's newsworthy. That's why I was covered in the news, because I was using a drone. But anymore, it's common. I would not say that there's one newsroom that specializes in drones. I don't, at least in the US. It's so common, I would say, it's almost, you don't even think about it. It's like you see a drone shot, There it is. It's
Mm.
common. Drones are accessible. The biggest hurdle was for a while laws and regulations. So
Yeah.
if you want to talk about the downsides of drones, it's
Yeah.
navigating legalities. I have no idea what the situation is in Indonesia.
Mhm.
In the US, it's very clear now, but in a lot of countries, it's not. Like Kenya is a good example of a global south country that has not so friendly drone regulations. It's very expensive to get permission, basically, to fly a drone. So it's prohibitive. It's legally prohibitive. It's therefore cost prohibitive because it costs a lot to get the license to fly the drone.
Mhm.
So the hard part, and even in the US now, the hard part is always there are rules and regulations. Where can you
Yeah.
fly? Where can you not fly? How high can you fly?
Mhm.
So the downside is that it's harder to just go out and shoot drone video than it is to go out with a tripod and a camera on the ground, right? So the downside is that you have to be knowledgeable about the rules and the regulations that apply to your country, your city, your region, your state, your county, whatever the local jurisdiction is. There's all different levels. Sometimes they conflict. In the US, whenever I travel to a state, a different state, I always look at the local regulations.
Mhm.
There's national regulations, there's local regulations. So the downside is it's annoying. You have to know what questions to ask, and it's impossible to always know all the answers, but you can know what questions to ask. And those are the questions. What are the national regulations? What are the local regulations for drones?
Mhm.
Otherwise, the
Mhm.
cost of drone technology, it's hard to say. I mean, for example, I know that it varies widely. The same drone in the US will cost a different amount in Turkey.
Mhm.
The team that I work with in Turkey, for example, they wanted to buy a drone this past year. Apparently the drones they couldn't buy one in Turkey. It was not available due to the supply chain issues. So
Mhm.
I don't really, it's hard for me to talk about price tags, how much they cost, because it varies so much around the world in terms of what drones are available and how much they actually cost, because it
Yeah.
changes so much. But I will say that I don't, like I keep saying, like I like DJI drones. I know it's problematic because of the Chinese. There might be problems because of the Chinese government, but for the work that I do, I'm not worried about that. And I really do think that anymore, buy a drone because of the camera that it has. So it's like, look at the camera that it has and how much money do you have? Can you get a drone with a good enough camera? Because inevitably the drone itself is most likely going to be just fine. It's just, is the camera good enough for your needs?
Mhm. 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 And how long does it take to produce a story using drones? Has it really affected the way journalists do their work in terms of workflow? Has it changed a lot, or how from your observation?
Well, I mean, it depends. Are you taking aerial photographs with the drone? Then you bring the photo into Photoshop. You fly the drone with your phone, right? It's it's really an extension of the mobile journalism toolkit that a
Mhm.
lot of people use. If you have a smartphone, if you have an iPhone, you shoot video on the ground with your iPhone, then you connect your iPhone to your drone control and you fly your drone and take video or photos or whatever. It's there's really no, it doesn't take longer because it's just so easy. And again, if you're just taking photos and videos, it's not at all different from what you would do with a camera in your hand, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
If you're doing photogrammetry, if you're doing a 360 video, if you're doing immersive media with a drone, that takes much longer. And it's not because of the drone, it's because working with 360 video, working with photogrammetry, working with 3D, VR, AR, those mediums they're more difficult to work with. So it's not because of the drone that it takes longer. It's just because of the medium and the
Mhm.
content, the nature of the content itself.
Mhm. And also the size of the files, I believe, is pretty huge, like
Yeah,
gigabytes. Yeah.
right. I mean, yeah, again, if you're just taking photos in 4K video, no surprises there compared to like it'd be like using your iPhone again,
Mm.
or your smartphone, whatever it may be. But yeah, if you're doing 360 video, if you're doing photogrammetry, it's the like the Zanzibar mapping initiative team, they had terabytes and terabytes of data,
Mm.
probably millions of photographs to map the entirety of Zanzibar. So
Yeah.
yeah, the data sets are exponentially larger with these other mediums.
We can imagine that. There's one question that related to your previous answer from Rini about experience in eastern part of Indonesia. There are places where not allowed to fly drones, and that makes it difficult for journalists to take pictures freely. So for some context, is not regulated yet. So yeah, in contrast with the US, it's regulated, even though the license is hard to obtain, but there's a clear way to go there. But yeah, in Indonesia, there's no clear rules on that. So from your experience, perhaps, what is the acceptance from both from like, security guards from private companies or common people that you took pictures using drones?
Well, I have two answers. So one, I'm from Nebraska, so I'm from the middle of the US. It's a big agriculture state. They grow a lot of corn, wheat, soybeans. So agriculture is a huge part of the economy, and agriculture everywhere in the world can be problematic. There can be, pesticide pollution. There can be different, agriculture is not always clean. And so there are in the US, for example, in the middle part of the country where there's a lot of agriculture, there have been laws and different kinds of rules and regulations that limit drone operators from flying over agricultural operations.
Oh, I see.
They're called ag gag laws. So it's like ag gag, like I'm going to choke you, right? So the agriculture industry doesn't like drones because they can show bad environmental practices, right? Which
But
of
that's
course,
exactly the intention, right? Is to
yes, of
expose,
course.
right?
Yes, of
Yeah.
course. Right, right. So, but I'm saying that there's tension there. So I've not had that issue. I have not covered agricultural environmental problems, but
Mhm.
that's it's a thing. And other industries too, like mining, other industries that pollute. You can get a nice photo of a very polluted river with a drone, right? So there's industries that do not like drones. But personally, early 10 years ago, people were kind of sometimes not sure what I was doing with a drone. Drones were not common, but
Mhm.
anymore, at least in the US, so many just random people have drones that I don't think people really care so much.
Mhm.
Um, but I am careful when flying over people's property.
Mhm.
So again, having an awareness of privacy rules and regulations if they exist. So like there's public airspace. Like I can fly a drone over the city. I can fly a drone over somebody's yard because it's public airspace.
Mhm.
So, but understanding that is important based on where you are. Again,
Mhm.
rules, regulations. Because some people have gotten mad. Americans have shot drones with their gun, right? Because Americans love guns and they will shoot at anything, especially a drone if they don't like the drone.
Yeah.
So that's happened. But I have not had an issue with that. I have had issues. I've run into a lot of regulatory limits now. Like traveling with the drone is much harder than it used to be. Countries make it difficult to import drones. That's another hard thing. It's easier to travel with a camera with the DSLR than it is a drone to cross borders. Customs people, like I used to take my own drone to Turkey. I no longer do that. because it's not licensed in Turkey, and it would be very difficult for me to license my drone in Turkey. So traveling can be very difficult with a drone now in ways that it did not used to be, and in ways that it is not difficult with a DSLR or just any camera.
All right. So a lot of restrictions gradually
Yeah.
emerge, right? Yeah. So perhaps we still have the last 4 minutes. We still have one more questions. Have you ever used drone to investigate the conflict areas somehow uncovered by satellite images? What is your experience, Ben?
I have not. There was one project that I was briefed about, but did not do. And the project involved mass graves in, oh gosh, I was South Sudan or in Sudan. I can't remember. I think that's where it was. And there was a journalist who basically said, hey, I'm covering this issue because, again, you know, from the sky with a drone, you can see where the land has been disturbed. Like, actually, in a way, one way that archaeologists will use a drone is to fly above a landscape to try to see if there's a field, but there are strange patterns in the field. They have a sense then that there might be the remains of a building underneath that field of corn or whatever, or wheat or grass. You could apply the same logic to, say, a mass grave. Maybe it happened, the graves were dug years ago, but with a drone, you can see the you know, ground disturbances in a way that you and I could not see it by just walking, right? So that was one conflict area project that I could have gotten involved with, but it never happened.
But the application of aerial shots will demonstrate the scale of the problem, and also it can ensure your safety to the places that you that is normally dangerous to access. As you mentioned.
There's an example. I can't show it because I'd have to find it, but there was a video of there was a Ukrainian drone operator. So there are these racing drones. They're very small drones. They fit in your hand, basically. They fly very, very fast. And a Ukrainian soldier flew his tiny drone through a Russian soldier's trench and just was flying like crazy, very, very fast, shooting this video. And that's a great example. And this was before the current war. So this was in one of the contested regions a few years ago, I think. But that video was a great example of in a war zone, how you can use, and that was not a journalist, but you know, again, you can gain access by very high speed flying. For example, to using a racing drone, you could do something like that. It was amazing.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ben. Perhaps to conclude the session, do you have anything to say, perhaps to encourage attendees here to try drones or anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I would find people in your community. There's not a flying labs in Indonesia, but there are people who have drones. I know. I'm going to assume that they're around. People who work with technologies like drones tend to be really friendly, and they want to use their tool. They want to use the drone. They want to go out and do projects with it. Find them, go talk to them. Maybe they'll teach you how to fly the drone. Maybe you can work with them to do a drone story. So you don't have to have a drone yourself to take advantage of what it can do. So my advice is, yeah, try to get your hands on a drone. Even if it's a very inexpensive drone, get it, try to use it, see what you can do with it, see what you can do. That's the point. There is an art form in a way to using a drone. It's a medium. It's like using a paintbrush. Everybody will use it differently. How will you use the drone? But if you cannot afford to buy your own drone, or you don't want to, or whatever the reason may be, find other people who have them and talk to them and see if they can work with you.
Either purchasing it by yourself or collaborating with other
Yeah.
drone pilot, the potential is endless.
Yeah.
Wildlife, disaster, sports, maps, land rights, everything. So thank
Thank
you so much again, Ben, for sharing with us and sharing a lot of remarkable works. And that's, that concludes the session of Drone Journalism 101. And thank you so much for Ben for joining us, and also to all attendees. And this session will be available online as well. Thank you so much and have a great day and have a great evening to you, Ben.
Thank you. Thank you, Rio.